can't.
Does everybody in the audience have one that wants one?
Wants one? Hearing committee proceeding. So we're going to now tell Mr. Aaron that we have 1 minute, and we're going to sit here for a minute, and he's going to start us. Mark? All right. Next order of business on today's Utility Commission meeting is a discussion of our 2014 cost of service study, and Ms. Dawn Lund from Utility Financial Solutions is going to present that to us. Ms. Lund?
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me here today. I'm here to present the overall results of a cost of service study, financial projection, and rate design that we've done for the electric, water, wastewater, gas, and telecommunications department. Everybody should have the presentation, and I will just kind of walk through the presentation. If you have any questions, please stop me along the way. I'm happy to answer them as we go along. If you want to look at page 1, I'm just going to basically go through what services we're providing for Danville. I'm going to have a few slides in here which should be review of the training that I presented in September. I'm just going to review a few of the key targets, and then we're going to move right into the revenue requirement phase of the studies that we're doing, which simply means basically the financial overview picture of each utility, where we need to move in the future, where we're recommending we should move into the future. And then we do have some preliminary results on some of the studies on a cost-serve basis, meaning the rate structure. And if you wish, I will come back after the first of the year and present the final results of the cost of service study with the rate design. But today our goal is to kind of review revenue requirements of each utility and where we recommend moving to in the future. So actually that introduction kind of covered page 1, so if we want to flip to page 2, just a little bit about our firm. We're an international consulting firm providing services for utilities across the country. I'm here tonight just to present the basic financial overview of each utility and where we need to move to in the future. I would like to get direction tonight on the rate design. After I present the information, if there are any utilities that we recommend rate adjustments, I would like some direction on the rate design, and if you agree on the direction that we're going. And again, the complete cost of service for study results and rate design will be presented next year. Tonight, I believe, is just basically to help formulate the budget, tell you where you are today, what you need to do to move to the future, and that will also help with your budget process. So if we want to flip to page 3, I'm just going to quickly review what a financial projection is, what 3 key targets we look at, and then I'm going to go over what a cost of service study is. The next couple slides you've already heard in September, but I thought it would be a good just to review some of the targets real quickly again. So if you want to turn to page 3, the first slide is a financial projection. Basically, we looked at each of the utilities' 5-year financial projection, where you are today and where you are moving to the future, with and without any recommended rate adjustments. That way, you can see where you're moving and where you possibly need to move. The key targets we look at are operating income, which simply means I look at my revenues less my expenses, and hopefully that's something positive. That's called operating income. There's a specific target we need to reach, or we would like to reach for those utilities, and based on a formula, and I will outline that as we go through each utility. A minimum cash reserve, we look at the risk areas for each of the utilities and designate a minimum cash reserve we'd like each utility to hold. And we look at debt coverage ratio. Debt coverage, simply if you have a revenue bond, you've agreed to meet certain covenances and ratios, and those are required. Simply, if you're not meeting those requirements, you're technically in default of your bond. So we want to be meeting those. But let's take each of these 3 key targets. I have a slide on each of them just to quickly review why they're important. Still on page 3, slide 2, we're looking at the operating income slide. Operating income is simply just ensuring that the current ratepayers are paying their fair share of what they're consuming, whether it be your yearly expenses or a portion of the fixed asset that they're consuming. We want to meet a certain operating income target to ensure that you're collecting the revenues you should be collecting. That's simply what that means. It funds all your expenses, your depreciation expense, the inflationary increase on your system, meaning when you go to replace assets in the future, they're going to cost you something more, so we want to recoup that inflationary piece, and interest expense on debt. Okay, so that's an important target to be funding all those. If we want to go to the next page, page 4, slide 1, reasons for adequate cash, that minimum cash policy I talked about. I look at risk areas to each of the utility and define a minimum. And when I say minimum, I mean that is a minimum. I consider if you're near that or at that level, that's considered cash critical. We want to be something above that level. And let's just review reasons for cash. The obvious reasons is we need cash to pay our expenses, but we also need cash to fund normal capital improvements. You should be reinvesting every year in your system. Fixed assets. We want to have funds to pay for our debt service payment. Obviously, we want to be paying that every year. Yes.
You talking about just the interest on the debt or the?
When I say your bond payment, I mean I want you to be paying principal and interest. You need cash on hand to be able to pay both of those things.
Interest and the cash.
Yep, interest and the principal. That's included in the minimum cash reserve we look at. Okay? We want to be able to support an unexpected expense. If we were to have equipment failure in any of the utility funds, obviously you want the crews out there getting the utility up and running again, and you want to have some funds available should something happen. And you also want to keep a minimum amount of cash to keep the utility healthy for current and future management. We don't want to, run the system where we've run cash down and we're not able to reinvest in the system. So those are reasons for adequate cash. The third target we look at is that debt coverage ratio, still on page 4, slide 2. Our debt coverage ratios, yes.
Before you move to that slide, can we go back just a second and talk about the minimum cash reserve?
Sure.
Currently, the Danville Power and Light has a cash and investments account that is considerably higher, the amount is considerably higher than the unrestricted fund balance. And you and I sort of talked about this before the meeting. We've spent, we sort of look at the unrestricted fund balance here. You all's technique incorporates this looking at cash. Is our cash position better looking at the cash as opposed to looking at the unrestricted fund balance?
I appreciate that question because that's an important question. The minimum cash balance that I am talking about is your unrestricted cash balance. In the studies, you have restricted funds. If you pull out your balance sheet, your audit, and look at your balance sheet, towards the bottom of the balance sheet, you've got some funds that say restricted for, it's basically work in progress capital that you've got money reserved so you can pay what's in progress. That's removed for the purposes of the study, meaning that cash is already considered paid for and gone and spent. So any beginning balances in the studies going forward, I don't include that cash. So that's an excellent question. I'm talking about unrestricted cash.
And that would be, the only thing would be incomplete, your CapEx, your projects, and where you have made a future obligation that you've got to account for. Then that's the only thing you're going to subtract from cash.
Okay, so the cash that I'm using, the current cash balance, the unrestricted balance, should be able to pay for your operating expenses, future operating expenses, future capital, future debt payments, that's funds available to pay for all those things, okay? The cash that I removed is for capital that you already have done in the past or are working on, and you do not have it on your capital plan going forward.
Right.
So I need to remove that cash in order to pay for what you got going on.
So then this would be a yearly amount, and do you say that you need cash in the bank to pay all your debt service, pay all your expenses, pay all of these things for a year?
No, not for a year.
Okay.
In general, the cash, there's, all different policy, all different utilities that you have that have different risk associated to them. Okay? So when I talk about a minimum, I'm not really talking about that's money you're going to use to pay for these things. Hopefully, you're flowing enough cash from operations as well to pay for those things. But this is kind of a minimum reserve I want you to have on hand should something go wrong with the system, or you should have an extraordinary expense. And typically, for the utilities, that ranges from about 90 to 120 days of cash on hand. So when you're converting it to a year, you would say 365 days. I'm saying 90 to 120 days in general. Now, you've got 5 utilities that I'm talking about with different risks associated to them. So that's going to range, but it's typically within the 90 to 120 day range.
Thank you.
But be sure we're on the same page. We're talking about, in our accounting system, the unrestricted fund balance.
Correct.
That's what you're talking about.
Yep, when I'm talking about a minimum, that's the minimum I want that unrestricted reserve cash balance to be. In reality, we want that to be something higher. When I say minimum, I mean you're cash critical. I don't want it to be right at that minimum or under. I want it to be at that level or higher.
That's at any point in time?
That's at any point in time. If you have a formal cash reserve policy, which is going to have a recommendation coming out of the study, if you don't already have one in place, is to have a formal cash reserve policy. And what happens is when you have that in place, if you fall near or below that minimum, it requires action from the board, either through a reduced expense, a rate increase, or issuing bonds for extraordinary capital. Okay, so a formal cash policy means I've assessed risk for each utility and I want you to take action if you're nearing or below that level.
We do have city council policies that cover cash balances, and if there is need to recommend changes in that, the utility commission can do so. But we do have formal policies.
Okay, good. So that's a good thing you have in place. Are there any other questions before I move to page 4? Second slide on page 4. Okay. So the bond debt coverage ratio, we talked about that. When you have revenue bonds, these are required. You've agreed to meet these debt coverage ratios, and it's important you meet them or you're technically in default. So let's turn to page 5, slide 1. This slide I just put in here because these are concepts we've been talking about. You've heard me speak a couple times now. Just a review of our proposed methodology of handling rates is we like small periodic rate increases. You want to keep up with your changing costs. When you do that, you avoid waiting, delaying those increases and those double-digit increases that you've had in the past. You don't want, to the extent possible, you want to minimize the impact to customers as much as you can, have these small incremental inflationary or less type increases so you can avoid those double-digit increases in the future. All the financial projections that I talk about today are just what they are. They're projections. They're educated beliefs of where we believe you're going to be financially. Any changes in expenses, revenue, capital, or anything can change these projections. So we recommend you update them with your budget process. In your cost of service study that we're performing now for you, you want to look at your costs. You should have a cost of service study done about every 3 years. You want to make sure you're collecting your costs properly from your customers. So that leads me right into why is the cost of service study important? Remember, we're doing basically 3 studies for you guys in each utility. We're doing a financial projection, we're doing a cost of service study, and we're doing a rate design, okay?
On the cost of service study, being this the first time in quite a while, it's probably taken long and more involved. But in the future, are you going to recommend some changes in the accounting so that it will run smoother and be less involved in the future?
Well, we had pretty good data for the studies as far as the expense data that I put into the studies. We use your budget, we use your trial balance, we use your financial statements. So we had decent data in order to be able to, what we believe is project where you are financially today and where you should move to the future.
Is every 3 years the right period to do this?
Every 3 years for a full cost of service study, or if you have a significant change in expenses. For example, let's just say in the electric department, you add a substantial substation or 2. You know, your cost structure will change there then. So anytime, you know, really 3 to, you could push it as far as 5, but we like to see them about every 3 years, or if you have a significant investment in infrastructure or a cost change. Okay? So what is, just real briefly, and then we're going to move right into the individual financial positions of each utility, but what is a cost of service study? It's just a method to equitably allocate your expenses. It basically answers the question, how much revenues should I receive from my customers? How should I get the revenues from my customers? For example, through a customer service charge, my commodity rate, what's the proper rate structure? And it also answers from which rate class should I be recouping those revenues, okay? So it fairly allocates your costs as practically and as best as possible for ultimately the optimal rate structure you should be charging your customers, all right? And that's what we've done. And those, we have some preliminary results today, but your final results will be if you would like to have us back in January, February, or whenever that is that you choose to do that.
Are those numbers that you're suggesting, or the answers to those questions, totally independent from your group? In other words, is this information that you've decided based on your experience with other utilities, or is this information that you've gathered from here?
This information for your studies, I do not look at any information from other utilities except for possibly some load data, if I didn't have good load data, okay, which just means system usage data. But I do not, the studies are not influenced by surrounding utilities, surrounding utility rates, rate surveys, those types of things. I specifically look at your costs, your data, and I equitably allocate those to come up with what rates you should be charging and what type of revenues you need to fund the risks to your system.
So how much detail do you do in analyzing the data as far as our costs?
Well, I look at your past audits, financial statements. I look at your past financial statements, which actually can tell me a lot of information. For example, the age of your system, how leveraged are your systems. I can get a lot of data from that, and I look at all that. Then I look at trends in expenses. Are there certain categories that's trending higher than others, and I project it that way. And then I look at your budget, and I do a financial projection independent from your budget. And then I compare that to your budget. And what that helps me do is if I'm far off from your budget for any whatever reason, then I go back and I ask staff, this category I'm higher or lower than your budget. Did you have a new process? Did you cut expenses somewhere? So we do an independent financial projection based on history. Then I compare it to your budget to ensure we're kind of all on the same page, if you will.
Mr. Shanks, they even asked down what size poles we had, size wire, types of transformers, how many. I mean, this was very detailed information that we provided down to the asset level.
And what Jason's bringing up is, that's called a minimum system analysis, where we actually looked at your system to determine how much fixed cost recovery should be put in the customer charge. Okay, we're gonna tell you at the end of the study, you should be charging, for example, an electric, let's just say $15 a month for the residential electric charge. That's a number that we base on analyzing the investment you have in your system. So there's all data behind the numbers that come out of the cost of service study. Okay? So let's actually, I'm at the bottom of page 6. Let's talk about the individual utility financial positions. I'm going to go through each utility. Again, this is based on information we know today. Any changes in your cost structure obviously will change these projections. But if we want to flip to page 7, let's start with the telecommunications department. The table that you see on page 7, table 2, this is the telecommunications just a very highly summarized financial projection for the telecommunications department with no rate changes, okay? The key columns here, there's 2 key columns kind of shaded off to the right. One is called target operating income and one is called minimum cash reserve. Those are 2 of the 3 targets we talked about. In the telecommunications department, there isn't any debt, so we're not going to worry about debt coverage ratio in this department for now. But the 2 shaded columns are what I want you to look at, and then the columns to the left of those. Over a 5-year period, you can see, for example, in 2016, which is the second line down, my target operating, actually just look at the flow of operating income compared to the target operating income. We're meeting our target operating income target in the telecommunications department. We're also meeting our minimum cash requirements, which is the last 2 columns. In this department, currently, over the 5-year projection period, the utility looks financially healthy. Now you'll see, as we approach 2020, we may need a rate adjustment in that year. You can see our operating income target, we're just meeting our target in that last year there. That would indicate, probably as expenses change and depending on growth in this department, you may or may not need increases moving forward there. Okay, so overall, right now, the telecommunications department looks financially healthy. Yes?
This may be beyond the scope of your study, but in this process, did you look at allocation of resources between different utilities? For instance, telecommunication works closely with electric. Did we look at how any of those costs are allocated?
Your costs are already broken out that way. Okay, you have in your trial balance, you have a trial balance for telecommunications, you have a trial balance for water, wastewater. So I look at the cost to each individual utility, and that's what's allocated in the study.
So the allocation of resources is from
That's already broken out.
That's what we've come up with locally.
Correct.
Okay.
That's already in your trial balance. So if you want to flip to page 8, the first slide, I'm just simply saying in that slide is currently you're meeting your financial targets. We don't currently recommend any revenue changes in that area. However, as I have mentioned a couple times before, we want you to be updating these 5-year financial projections with your budget process, because any changes in revenues, expenses, and capital can change the projected rate track. Okay? Now let's move to the gas department. If we want to flip to page 9, there's 2 slides I want to talk about on the gas department. The first slide is the summary of the financial 5-year financial projection with no revenue or rate changes. The columns that I want you to concentrate on are the 2 middle columns and that last column called debt coverage ratio. You can see the adjusted operating income. If you look at the very bottom box, my adjusted operating income I want in that department based on your specific gas utility requirements is about $1.9 million. You'll see the operating income is dropping and not meeting that target over the 5-year financial projection period. You'll see that the cash is dropping slightly, which is in the next column. And it is meeting our minimum cash critical requirement, and our debt coverage ratio is healthy in that utility, okay? So what we would look at is the next slide and say, what type of increases would we need to keep the utility healthy? To keep the utility, basically to stabilize that operating income, to stabilize or grow that cash slightly like we should be doing, and meeting our debt coverage ratio. Well, we know debt coverage ratio isn't a problem, but let's look at those two columns with a projected rate track of a 2% in 2017, which is not next year, not next fiscal year 2016, but the next year. And then we would have 0 in the next year and 2% in the following year. You can see, by the time I'm done with all the slides, you're going to see the philosophy that I'm trying to do overall is staggering any needed rate increases between the utilities. I'm trying to keep the utilities healthy while lessening the impact to our customers by staggering rate increases. So I've looked at each utility and I've determined when each utility should incur a recommended rate increase to keep it healthy. Okay, so for the gas department, that appears to be in 2017, which isn't next year, but it's the year after. And then we'd skip a year and we'd have another 2% increase. Now, the important thing to know here is in the gas department, you have a PGA, which is called a power gas or purchase gas adjustment. And any changes in purchased gas will follow the formula that's currently in place. So that PGA will change if purchased gas costs change. That's not fixed. Okay, this is just a projection that we need to do to our base rates, and your PGA will work as it always has. Okay, are there any questions in that area?
Let me talk a minute about capital spending. If you have a situation where you can see on the horizon, excuse me, that you're going to have some above average, above normal capital expenditures in the next 2 or 3 budget cycles, how are you accounting for that, or are you even trying to account for that here?
Well, that's an excellent question. And in general, we would expect that you would bond for or borrow for extraordinary capital. And what I mean by extraordinary capital is, in general, I want you to be reinvesting in your system at the rate of depreciation. Okay, your system's aging. I want you to be reinvesting at about the rate it's aging. Now, when we spend something above that, that's when we look at, do we need to bond for this capital improvement? And the projection, would show whether you need to bond for that. And I can see that there's 2 capital improvements there at $3.2 million in 2016 and 17. And the projection showed if we do the 2...
Repeat that. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
You do show a couple extraordinary expenses in those years. In
where are you looking?
16 and 17.
In which
If you
slide?
look at 2016 and 17 and go to the capital improvement column, which is the second column.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Now, if you implement the recommended 2% every other year, you could most likely fund those improvements through rates.
You could.
Correct.
And what's that calculation? How do you know what that comfortable level is?
Because if we want to go look at that middle column, which says projected cash balances,
Yes, ma'am.
the minimum I want in that utility is almost $7 million. Mm-hmm. And you can see that that projection, the second table, my projection shows that I can meet that.
The 8.375? Is that
Correct.
Am I looking at the right place? Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go through this a little bit, be sure I'm understanding it. Let's just take the first year, 2015. Now, when you say projected revenues, that's pretty straightforward. Projected expenses is pretty straight. Now, in those expenses, are they operating expenses? Are they debt and interest expenses?
That's an excellent question, because you won't be able to pull out your budget and match it with the expenses you see here, okay? Because in your budget, in your total budget line, okay, you have all your expenses in there, you have depreciation. Towards the bottom, you've got debt in there, you've got capital in there, because you're looking at what you need to cash flow in total. Now, when I have expenses in that column, that's called a utility basis, and what that includes is all your cash outflow for your operating expenses. It includes your depreciation expense that I want you to be funding for capital replacement, okay, your depreciation expense. That's what that column, those columns are, that column is funding. Now, the next column, adjusted operating income, the reason I establish a target for that is because that needs to recoup the inflationary cost on those assets. Depreciation is recouping the cost of that asset. But I also want to recoup the inflationary component of that, and that's what your return or your operating income covers.
Is that net income?
That's not net income, that's operating income. There, in an income statement, you've got revenues, expenses, operating income.
When you say adjusted, that doesn't come from the previous numbers, that's something that you feel we need?
That is what I project your real operating income will be. But after operating income, you've got other revenues and expenses, okay, which is revenues and expenses that can jump around that I don't want to set rates on. I want to set rates on stable income. And then you have your net income. So basically, operating income just means after I collect my revenues, after I deduct my expenses, including depreciation, what am I going to have left over? We obviously want that number to be something positive, because that number is supposed to fund your interest expense and your inflationary increase on your assets.
And that's the adjusted operating income number?
Correct. Yep.
Now, the projected cash balance, where did that come from now?
That's taking your beginning cash balance, okay, adding all the revenues you're receiving, all the cash flows that are outflowing, and that's what your projected balance, unrestricted cash projection balance, will be at the end of that fiscal year. Now, that's where I take into consideration your debt payment and capital. Notice when I talked about operating income and expenses, I don't include debt and capital. I look at that, that's why I look at all three targets together. I look at that over on a cash flow basis, and I make sure you can fund those things and pay for those things. And that's what that cash column is.
That's what you recommend we should have, or that's an actual number there?
That's an actual number that's projected that you're projected to have. Now, what we recommend you have is at the look in that on that slide at that box at the bottom of the chart where it says recommended minimum target in 2015, recommended minimum target in 2019, and you can see that that's about $6.7 million. That's the recommended minimum, and then you can compare that recommended minimum to the projected cash balances column to see if you're meeting that minimum.
And that's, the projected cash is our unrestricted fund balance.
Correct, yeah. Are there any other questions on the gas department? All of the rest of these are set up pretty much the same. So I want you to understand the three targets and what these columns are showing you, because you're going to see these for the next utilities as well. Where basically I'm trying to give you a picture of where you are today with no rate adjustments. If you did nothing, what's going to happen to the utilities department? Then let's look at, okay, let's not, let's look at what we should do on a minimum basis to minimize the impact to our customers, to keep the utility healthy, each utility healthy. And you can see I've done that in table 2 on page 9. I've put in small, less than inflationary increases that basically stabilize that operating income. It stabilizes your cash and builds on it slowly, but I'm still not even meeting my target operating income. I'm not driving that fund all the way up to where it theoretically should be. I'm slowly trying to introduce incremental, slow, every other year rate increases to minimize impact on customers, yet work towards getting healthy. And you'll see I'm doing that in all the funds. It's the same methodology. Okay? So let's go to the wastewater department. Page 10, table, the second table on the page. This again, I'm just showing you where you are financially today with no rate changes. And the key columns are those two middle columns and that last debt coverage ratio column. You'll see operating income is dropping. I want my target to be almost $3 million. Are you guys finding page 10? Do you have page 10?
Oh, I'm sorry, I looked ahead.
Oh, okay. So page 10, table 2, operating income target is about $3 million in that utility, and you can see we're dropping. This is with no rate changes. Our cash balances were under our critical minimum currently, and our debt coverage ratio, we are healthy. Let's look at page 11 and kind of see. This is the wastewater department. Page 11, table 1. In order to keep that utility healthy, okay, I'm trying to give small incremental increases every other year, staggering the increases between the utilities. And you're going to see a table summary at the end of our recommendations. In order to stabilize that operating income and to build that cash, because it's currently under the minimum we want to fund, you would need a 3.5% rate increase every other year. Now, on a cost to serve basis, if we were to meet our operating income target today, that fund would need over a 7% rate increase. Okay? We're not recommending that. I don't want you to do that. We're not recommending that. We're saying we know we're not funding what we should be funding, but let's slowly approve or slowly recommend some rate increases to get the utility healthy slowly over time and lower impacts to customers. So if there's one utility that we would recommend a rate increase next year, 2016, it's the wastewater fund. You are currently under your recommended minimum cash for that fund. Now, if we want to move to same page 11, table 2, even though the results of the study, these are preliminary cost of service rates. These are not the recommended rates. It just simply means in a perfect world, if you charged the perfect rates in the wastewater utility, this is what you would be charging, okay? Now, what we use this table for is to help us in the rate design. Let's say the commission does decide to move forward with the 3.5% rate increase, recommended increase. I would use this table to design rates, and I look at the impact by customers' usage, by meter size and customer usage, to make sure I'm as fairly as possible, treating everybody in the wastewater department as fairly as possible with a 3.5% rate increase. Okay, that's what the cost of service study results does. It tells me what I should be charging my customers in the perfect world. But in order to lower impact on customers, I have to move there slowly. Okay? Are there any questions in the wastewater department? Okay, let's flip to page 12. We'll go to the table 2 on the bottom of the page. This is the financial projection. Again, I'm kind of throwing a lot of information at you on 5 utilities. You're going to look at a summary at the end, a table that we can kind of look at the staggering effects, the staggered rate increase, and the years in which utility, okay? So page 12, table 2, we have the water department with no rate changes, all right, with no rate changes. Where we are today, where we'd be moving to in the future, again, those 2 middle columns. We have adjusted operating income is dropping. Our minimum cash requirement is pretty stable, and we're meeting our debt coverage ratio. So if you want to go to page 13, the first table at the top, in the water department, remember in the wastewater department, we recommended a 3.5% increase for next year. okay, 2016. Now in the water department, when the wastewater department would have a 0% rate change, we would recommend a 3% rate change in the water department. So if you staggered the rate increases in the water department 3% every other year, you can see we stabilize operating income and we stabilize and grow our cash slightly. Okay? Now the page 13, the second slide on that page is the preliminary water cost of service results.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
As I go through these tables, and I really apologize, I got held up in Charlottesville and I'm late. When I look at the recommended minimum targets that you have calculated, a lot of that is obviously tied to a capital improvement plan. So as I look at these rate projections without a capital improvement plan summary, it's very difficult for me to make any judgment. Then the second thing that I'm wondering about here is I look at these projected cash balances, all that are exceeding significantly your recommended minimum targets. I'm wondering how you can justify the rate increases that you are suggesting when we're, for instance, in the gas area, we've got some things aren't just quite adding up.
Okay. First of all, if you look on the table, each
Right.
table does summarize the capital.
Right.
Okay, so you will,
But again,
I'm going to answer all your questions.
all right, without having details behind that, is that available for us to take a look at?
The capital that is in the program mirrors basically, mirrors basically depreciation, meaning what you should be funding in the system.
Okay, so you've got that fixed at a 1.0 match versus depreciation? or
Not a
we
1
exceed?
point, it's not fixed. It's similar, it mirrors, it's close to.
Yeah, because I see numbers going 1622, 1724 as an example in wastewater.
What page are you
That's
on?
probably, I'm looking at top of page 11. That kind of change is probably not a consistent
Okay, and that
depreciation
wastewater,
load.
right, that's actually that's actually your capital plan in wastewater. In
Right.
years that, for example, if you didn't have a projection of capital, I put in depreciation because
Okay.
I simply, in reality, you're not gonna spend zero.
So for instance, if we were to look at the water where you flatline the investment at 2 million, that would roughly equal the depreciation.
Approximately.
That you
And there's-
saw.
Correct, and there's two things I wanna say. You said,
And if I'm asking questions you already covered, just say, hey, we already covered that, and we can move on.
a couple of them we have, but I want you to understand. So the capital, you made a comment that the capital improvement program can drive rate increases, and I want you to understand that can drive the cash target rate increase, not operating income as much, because when I look at operating income, the only thing I'm funding there is depreciation based on capital. So whatever I've invested, let's pretend I invest $1.6 million in the wastewater department, and let's say that has a 33-year life. I'm going to take $1.6 million divided by 33, and that's the only effect I'm going to have in 2015 on an operating income basis.
Yeah, that's assuming we're not going out to the debt market to service our capital needs.
Well, that still, I would record depreciation on that. Now, when you're talking about debt, that's the second target that we're looking at, that projected cash
Yeah,
column.
so talking about the projected cash balance, again, help me here understand
Yep.
how you've made these analyses, because what I'm seeing is the projected cash balances are exceeding by several $1 million the minimum critical that you've set. So is there a target cash
Yes.
balance that we don't see here?
Yes, there
that
is.
we're
And
trying
we
to achieve?
covered, okay, this is what a minimum cash balance is. Let me cover that again. A minimum cash balance, I look at the risk areas in
Right.
each utility, and I say, at a minimum, I want you to have this at a cash critical minimum. If you're nearing that or fall below, it should require action from the board. I want you to be something above that, because here, for example, you happen to pick out wastewater, so let's talk about that. You have $94 million historically invested in the wastewater department.
Right.
You currently have a net book value of $53 million in the wastewater department, okay? That means potentially the difference there is, what is that, $40 million? You have to replace $40 million sometime in the future on that. And you, in the wastewater department, currently have, in this example, $2 million, which is under our minimum projected of $5 million on the table. So to answer your question, it's a cash minimum, and it's on each table in the summary. It's on the bottom of the table, the minimum I want you to meet. I want you to be something above that minimum, because I'm just trying to give you an idea of, if you're cash critical, you're at this level. Now we need to step back and say, how much do I have invested in each of these utilities? I have, $94 million invested in the wastewater department, $54 million remaining net book value. I'm going to need cash to replace that sometime in the future. So I obviously, the age of my assets can make cash flow upward and downward. As my system's aging, I'm hoping that my cash is building, because I know I'm going to need to reinvest in it. If I'm investing a lot of money right now in my system, and it's becoming a newer system because my net book value is new, then my cash is spending down. I'm spending down cash because I'm investing a lot of money in it. So that minimum is not a target, it's a minimum. It's cash critical. If you're at that point, I'm going to suggest you need to do something.
And did you calculate targets?
How did I calculate the targets?
Did you calculate targets?
I did calculate targets.
It would be helpful to have those on these summary sheets.
I can real quickly review that. We reviewed that in September, and what that includes is basically 4 risk areas to the utility. I look at the risk of O&M expenses. I look at the risk of the historical investment you have in your system. I look at your debt risk, your debt payment risk, and I look at your 5-year capital program. You will, that days cash on hand will usually range that we recommend between 90 and 120 days. It depends on the risk to that utility.
So you haven't calculated targets is what you're telling me. You're giving me a range.
No, I have calculated targets.
So could we have those on an
You
exhibit
can have the
in
detail
future?
behind
That's
that.
all I'm asking you.
Yep, and I can,
I think that's very important. We have to understand how much risk we're willing to consider taking. This is not an environment that is very receptive to rate increases right now. We may be willing to accept a greater risk on our wastewater assets, for example. So we do need that information regarding your recommended target.
Yep, and that's
Is that
fine.
understood?
Yep.
Thank you, ma'am.
Absolutely, I can provide that. One thing I do want to mention, especially in the wastewater area, when we talked about this a little bit, what I'm trying to do, and that's completely obviously up to the commission, what kind of risk the commission wants to take. What I'm trying to do today is paint you a picture and try to avoid the double-digit rate increases you've had in the past. In 2005, 6, 7, and 8, in the wastewater department, you had an 11% increase, an 18% increase, an 18% increase, and an 18% increase.
But that was because we ended up with a stranded asset because of the loss of a partner.
My point is,
That is not going to occur again in this fund, ma'am.
hopefully it won't, because
It won't occur because we had a special issue that occurred at that point in time. It's probably not a good example to use.
Well, you also had a double digit in the water department last year and the year before. What I'm trying to avoid, what my plan avoids.
That's a better example.
Is double-digit increases. I'm trying to keep you on track. If you let these funds, if you let your operating income continually decrease, and you need to get back up to the level you should be, keeping the utility healthy and funding what you should be, you're going to incur double-digit increases again.
Right.
Okay? My plan is hopefully going to keep you on track with something with inflationary increases or less when we can, and move forward keeping the utility healthy. And I'm trying to present a plan, and you'll see a summary at the end, reasonable increases that help keep the utility healthy over time to avoid those double-digit increases. Those are the hard increases for people to absorb, like the ones we had, if wastewater wasn't a good example, like we had in the water department last year and the year before, double-digit increases. So,
Well, and wastewater could be a good example if in fact we have to change a basic process down there in terms of our chlorination. And I don't see that capital improvement is reflected in this capital plan. So because of that, that's why I was asking what type of details you were using under your capital improvement plans, because quite frankly, I don't think the commission has seen them.
okay, well, I can give you that detail behind, but we did receive, capital plans from the utilities, so hopefully.
We were
you've
just
seen
briefed
those.
last month on the risks that we have associated with our chlorination process in the wastewater plant. It is a significant risk. It poses a significant risk to the potentially recreational population in the area, and we're probably talking somewhere in the neighborhood of a $4 to $5 million investment. It's not here, okay?
And if you
So-
want a sensitivity analysis done on that, that's easy to do. I
Right.
can put the $4.5 million in there and tell you what that'll do to
And we may
rates.
be we may be in a position where our rate adjustments are under projected.
In your
If in
scenario,
case-
possibly.
If we are in a position where we're forced into making that investment, or we decide to do that otherwise.
Yep, and I'd be happy to do that sensitivity.
Thank you.
This presentation tonight, you will get a full cost of service summary detail after the first of the year. This is basically to review where you are financially, where we need to move to help with your budget process. So I appreciate all the questions, and I know what kind of detail you're looking for, and that's in our typical full cost of service study report, which you will get.
Great.
So when we look
Let me
at,
interrupt again. On page 11, the top slide there. Let me see if I understand what all you're saying here. If you look at 2016, our adjusted operating income's $2.5 million, projected cash balance about $2.3 million. You're saying the recommended amount for the next year is 2.8 and 5 million for those two columns, right? So you're recommending a rate increase because we're below those numbers.
correct. I'm trying to stabilize that middle column that says adjusted operating income. I'm trying to stabilize that and stop it from decreasing. If we let that go over time, that's when you need those double-digit increases.
You're not trying to look at the cash balance? That's not affecting you too?
Sure it is.
I look at them, I look at that column, the next column, the cash balance column, and that last column.
All right.
I look at the three targets together and make sure those are healthy.
Well, after the rate increase, we're still below what you recommend there, right?
You're still below your operating income target, which is supposedly,
And the projected cash balance.
correct.
All right, so then we go on, we skip a year, then in 2018, you're recommending another rate increase. Then we're close to the adjusted operating income target. But we're over the cash balance.
Now, that's not a targeted cash balance. Remember, that's a minimum. I want it to be over the minimum.
All right.
I want it to be over the minimum.
Then when we get to 2019, after we've had an increase in 2018, we're still behind the target for operating income.
Correct.
When are we going to catch up with that then?
Well, slowly, you're going to hopefully do every other year rate increases, okay? What I'm trying to do is by slowly implementing a phased-in approach is work you to targets over time, or at least stabilize that operating income. Certainly, if the commission chooses to fully fund operating income, that rate adjustment can be higher. What I'm trying to do is keep them, I'm trying to make it so we at least take action have them close to something to inflation where we at least stabilize that operating income while I'm looking at all 5 other utilities as well. You know, in the perfect world, I would fully fund that wastewater operating income target next year. And I would fully fund the operating income target in every single fund you have in the perfect world. But the plan that we put together, I'm trying to ease the impact on your ratepayers while slowly getting each utility healthy or maintaining the health of the utility without decreasing it anymore, because I want you to not get in a situation of double-digit increases. I want you to keep in the situation of healthy utilities. And these are less than inflationary increases that we're recommending in most areas. Wastewater is not, but in the other areas, they're less than inflationary increases. I mean, your costs are increasing, we're just trying to keep up with it. Okay? Page 11, I think we were past page 11, weren't we? We were on water. We were on actually page 13, table 2. So if you want to flip to page 13, table 2. What the preliminary cost of service study showed for the water department is the rate structure. Now, we've talked about the rate increase. We could forego one next year in 2016, but we're recommending one for 2017. What the cost of service study results showed is any rate increase should be put on the customer charge. I'm looking at table 2, page 13. You currently charge $8.85. On a cost to serve basis for a 5/8 inch meter, you should be charging $11.63. On the next rate design, we are not going to recommend moving from $8.83 to $11.63. All right, we might only add $1 to that customer charge, and then put the rest on the CCU charge, all right? Because what I have to do is look at the impacts to customers for low users and high users. And the more that I add to that fixed component, that monthly customer charge, on a percentage basis, it hits your low users more, okay? So I look at everybody along that usage pattern and try to treat them as fairly as possible. So this table, page 13, table 2, just gives me a guide. If the board or if the commission approves the 3% rate increase, it gives me a guide on how I'm going to design the rate. Okay? Now let's talk about the electric department. This is the last fund we need to go through, so we'll go through that, and then we're going to just talk about a few steps on direction from the commission. So if we want to go to page 14, the second table on page 14, you will see 2 shaded boxes, one about 2/3 of the way over and one at the very end. The 2/3 of the way over shaded box is that target operating income we've talked about. If we want to fund everything, we need to be meeting that target. Our minimum cash reserve is that last column, minimum cash critical. So this is a picture of the financial projection for the electric department, but there's a couple key things I want to note. You can see the second column, and there aren't any rate adjustments, so this is without any rate adjustments. And this is actually recommending that in next month, you're projected to move your PCA to 0.004. Your PCA, the power cost adjustment, is currently 0.002. Okay? You're projected to move that to 0.004. Now, what we're recommending is not moving that power cost adjustment to 0.004. We're projecting keeping it at 0.002, and I'm going to follow up with some information on that. And this is what this table summary shows, all right? Now, when I say keeping it at 0.002, I'm talking about for expenses we know today, for power supply expenses we know today, okay, and partially starting to recoup some of our prior unrecovered PCA. So what I'm telling you is that that is not a fixed amount at 0.002. If power supply costs change, your PCA formula is going to move that current power supply your PCA will move with that cost, okay? So when I say 0.002 in this projection, I'm just saying for what we know today. Okay, you guys all, I think, understand how the PCA works. As power supply costs, and same thing with your PGA. As those costs change, that moves with it. Okay? So that's what that projection shows. Now, what's more important, let's flip to the next page, page 15. And this table shows we would not recommend a rate increase for 2016, which is next year, the next budget period. For the power supply costs we know today, we would keep the 0.002 PCA. All that's simply doing is delaying our cost recovery on some of the past PCA that we're trying to recover, okay? We were gonna move it quicker and recover it more quickly when we moved that PCA to 0.004, but we're recommending smoothing that out even a little bit longer, keeping the PCA at 0.002, and then in 2017, we would look at a 1.5% rate increase in the electric department. Okay, now that's to keep up with changing costs in the electric department. Your PCA would still move with any changes in power supply, and we're still trying to recover some of that unrecouped PCA from before. Okay? Now, if you look at the cost of service study results, let's look at that table. And let's look at the 2016 fiscal year. And our current operating income projected is 2.1 million. Now, our target in that area is 7.3 million, meaning if I wanted to fund all my expenses, my depreciation, my inflationary increase on assets, my interest expense, I would be targeting a $7 million operating income. You can see I'm below that amount. If I wanted to meet that $7 million target operating income, I would need, on page 15, table 2, I would need a 4.3% rate increase. We are not recommending that, okay? We're recommending smoothing that out over time, specifically with a 1.5% rate increase in 2017. And under this plan, in the first table on page 15, under this plan, I want to note again, a 1.5% rate increase for 2017 is recommended. The PCA would, barring any changes in power supply costs, would stay at is projected to be a 0.002 until June of 2017. And then at that time, I'm just trying to smooth out that recovery, at that time, we would then move the PCA to 0.004. Yes.
So raising the PCA to 0.004 is the method you're going to use to get the 1.5% increase
No.
in the revenue?
That's an excellent question. Those are two totally different things. That's an excellent question. The PCA is meant to, in your base rate schedules, you charge, $7.50 or $7.85 or something like that, $7.80 for your electric customer charge, and X amount for your kilowatt hour charge. In that kilowatt hour charge, in your base rates, you have a certain amount of power supply expenses buried in that kilowatt hour charge. The PCA is for any changes from that base expense that's buried in that rate schedule. So I have a certain amount buried in my base rate schedule. If my power supply costs fluctuate above that, I have a positive PCA. If my power supply costs go below that, I have a negative PCA.
Okay, so if the 1.5% rate increase is not in the PCA, where is it?
It's going to go, in my recommendation, it's going to go on your current customer charge in your base rate schedules.
You'll put it all on the customer charge?
No, your current customer charge and your kilowatt hour charge.
Okay.
And for, commercial customers, you may have a demand charge. It might go in the demand. You're not looking at that piece of it yet. If you approve the 1.5%, I go back, design the rate, and I come back and show it to you. So that's a great question. I'm talking about your base rate schedules when I talk about the 1.5.
Okay. All right, now and then a little more piece of this. Do you know, can you project what the PCA balance, cumulative power cost recovery balance is going to be when you raise this at June 30th, 2017?
I could look up what the balance would be, but I think I know what you're alluding to.
I'm trying,
If I can answer it this way?
Yeah, we need to know where this $18 million balance is going to be.
Okay, if you keep your PCA at .002 until June of 2017.
Right.
And then you move it to .004. That under recovery balance will be paid off in July of 2018. Okay? If you do... Okay, correct. I mean, for what we know today, okay?
I understand
The
all that.
PCA
This is
could
very
change.
static. I understand it's a static, but we need to have a static number before we can even think about what we're going to do when we have another, if we have another.
But Jason's very correct. That
But this
PCA
is the
could change.
stranded cost and the congestion, the one-time congestion charge
Correct.
has all been included in the PCA along with the under recovery. Those three
That's
elements.
what the .002 is recovering, plus anything that I have need in there that's not in your current base rate schedules for power supply, okay? So I'm recovering kind of two things right now in there. I'm recovering what I need to recover currently for any changes in your power supply costs that aren't in your base schedules, and that stranded cost recovery. Now, if I change the PCA to .004 in December as scheduled,
In December,
right
is-
now, your current
Our
piece,
current rate plan changes it in December, and she's recommending that that be delayed. But she's going to tell us when we would pay this off, if we did not take her recommendation. Is that
Correct.
correct?
point,
Okay.
if you change to our, what you're scheduled to do right now to .004 in December,
Right.
that congestion charge and fixed stranded cost recovery would be recouped around March 2017. If we delay, if we spread out that recovery longer and keep it at .002, our recovery is more like July 2018. Yes.
I understand, you're assuming, you have to assume that nothing else happens, like additional congestion charges, et cetera. But assuming that the cost of power that we must spend to purchase power is going to go up, and I think that's a logical assumption, that would come also into the PCA, is that correct?
I want your PCA to work like it does. It's supposed to recover any changes in current costs. So when I say .002 till June 2017, if your power supply costs go up, that's actually going to go up.
So my point is, you've got the built-in rate increase that we know is going to come into play, what, in 2016?
That's what we're recommending.
Right.
That's overall
So-
revenues.
So we know we've got a rate increase, and in all likelihood, we've got a larger PCA than what we're going to talk about today. Because in all likelihood, coal is going to be less likely power source. More expensive types of power are going to have to be purchased. Is that not a reality?
If your power supply costs change from projections, yes, that PCA will change.
Okay.
Who made the projections of our power cost?
We worked with, Jason, do you know did we get that directly from AMP? We got that directly from AMP. We got that,
Amp,
yes.
how good we think those are, Jason?
They give us their best forecast for the next year,
Next,
several years.
And their history has been,
Not too good.
they have been optimists. correct?
Well, and that's why you have a PCA though, to keep the utility healthy, because really, no one can project power supply costs. I mean, the only thing we know about a projection, it's gonna be wrong. We hope we're educated enough and have enough information to have something that's gonna be close. But we know it's gonna be wrong. You know, any projection isn't gonna be right on. It can be close.
What are you all's rules for PCA in duration and in dollar limit?
In the perfect world, you would move your PCA with your power supply costs, changes in any power supply costs on a 6-month to 12-month rolling average. You wouldn't let a deficiency build in the perfect world. Okay, a PCA theoretically is put into place for any changes in power supply costs. That risk is shifted from the utility to keep the utility financially healthy, because power supply costs are so hard to project. You don't fix that or change the methodology from that formula in a perfect world. Some utilities do for various reasons.
What are your tolerances for dollar amount and time duration to recover? You looking at a percentage of the total, or?
No, we look at 6-month rolling, meaning I want you to recover everything you should be recovering on a 6-month rolling average changes in power supply. So I have, you know, after 6 months, if you keep up with that formula, you should be recovering it over a 6-month rolling average.
So you believe that we can get back to zero by July 2018?
That's what the current projection is if you keep the PCI at .002 to June 2017 and then change it to .004.
Right.
Plus any other PCA adjustments that we would have to make, using your advice, using a 6-month rolling average, we would still collect the under recovery. Pretty close.
Correct. So that PCA could go, you know, if power supply costs go up, that PCA is going to go up if we're keeping up with our PCA formula.
And thank you for the advice.
Let me ask you, are we putting ourselves in a position to once again, by putting off the PCA adjustment, are we putting ourselves to once again pay the piper for delaying? In other words, the potential there is for the cost of power to considerably go up, and then all of a sudden, the PCA's got to go up, and we haven't recovered the under-recovery and the other items that have contributed to our underfunded PCA.
So all we're doing is still smoothing that out and just delaying the recovery by, what is that, a year and 3 months maybe?
Well, I think the concern, though, is if you look at our projected cash balance, and the fact is we have an unusually large cost recovery that's in our receivables that is very large versus ordinary accounting standards. So if we were to take that cost recovery and subtract it from a projected cash balance, we have a projected cash balance of, if we didn't recover anything, more like $20 million, not $38 million. That makes us nervous. To your point earlier, you know, if we were to have a catastrophic incident at a substation, for example, we would be in a position where we would have to make capital expenditures very quickly. So, you know, while it's a noble thing to push it out, it may not be wise.
Well, eventually, though, you'll recover that, and that's why you'll see your cash build.
And all we need is one more congestion charge.
That's what scares me.
One bad month.
That's all we need.
Because I really am concerned that these congestion charges are going to be more the norm than the exception.
We're hedging. We're doing the swaps and the FTRs that we talked about in the committee meetings to hedge our losses more or less for this year. We can wrap some of that into the PCA. That's a cost of power, more or less.
Well, I think we appreciate that effort. And we appreciate that everybody's thinking about this in a serious way. But it just seems like the more we talk about this, the more I'm informed that we could get hit with one bad thing could happen. And I mean, it just goes, this PCA never goes away.
And,
I mean, you could very easily
Jason,
see that scenario.
you've been able to mitigate.
I mean, we were sitting here last year, and this was not a problem.
No, never heard of it.
Last November, last September and October, this was not a deal.
So for instance, if you were to look at what we've been able to do today, and let's say we had the same thing occur in January, what would be the potential congestion charge that we would be hit with? It's still going to be several million. It could be several $1 million. Even though you've done a great job of mitigating the double congestion hit that we got hit with Prairie State. Noble effort done. But it still could be, how much?
We're not foolproof. We
Right.
never are.
Right.
But that's what the PCA is for. And we can spread that cost out if we need to.
Well, but we might want to be more conservative and clear up our receivables according to the plan we agreed to several months ago.
What scares me equally is the fact that it's more likely to have a congestion charge in the summertime than the wintertime.
Yeah.
I mean, that really, we hadn't been hit with that yet. And I'm just throwing all this out here because anything we can do to do the best guess of how to handle this is where we want to go. But I'm just, that congestion charge scares me, and I'm worried this winter, and I'm doubly worried any summer.
Let me do this for you, and maybe this will help. And I'm sure Jenny can get the information to you guys. When I go back to the office, I can put in, because right now you're looking at a table with .002, okay? I can go back to the office, put in .004, like we planned, and then you can look at the difference. That might help you make an educated,
And
more
perhaps in
educated guess.
2017, you come back with a little less of a rate increase.
And this is a biennial. She's going to go back and do the rate design. This is 2 years. We're recommending rates for 2 years.
It won't affect
This
the
is a
rate.
5-year snapshot.
Right.
PCA won't affect the rate.
Well, it may affect her projected rate adjustments that she's provided for 2017 through 2019.
So we'll be
Because
back
of the
here in
cash balance?
2016 looking at the similar projections, hopefully.
Well, it seems to be coming down as we have this discussion to me that you have to make a decision in the end about whether or not you're comfortable with putting off the inevitable of having to pay or having to raise these rates, and just hope everything goes along all right, or would you rather move up those rate increases and maybe feel a little more comfortable about not getting in trouble down the road? Because it's an unusual situation we're in, and I don't think anybody's really comfortable with it. And I'm thinking we should consider maybe getting out of this situation a little quicker. Since, I don't see there's any way around it. FERC is not going to get PJM to stop charging us congestion charges. We discussed that last week. So.
Yeah, and we learned quite a bit about what PJM did to try to help us in those congestion charges, including, buying power from companies that had interruptible gas that they couldn't have turned on anyway. That was very wise of them.
It's hard to do business with people like that sometimes. Go ahead.
Okay, let's go to
We
page
digressed. Please go ahead.
Oh, that's right. I just have a couple more things to review real quickly. We're almost done
Go
here.
back to, page 15, that bottom slide. You're saying if we didn't delay the proposed 1.5%, you would need to go up 4.3% overall now?
Okay, I'm saying if you go, that's a great question. Go to page 15, the first table. See that little box that kind of has a dotted box around it. And then go over to the two middle columns where it says adjusted operating income of 2.1 million, and then the target operating income of 7.3 million. You would have to put in 4.2% in that little dotted box, if you will, have a 4.3% rate increase in that year to fully meet the $7 million operating income. But I'm saying instead of doing that, let's not fully fund operating income right now. Let's spread that out over time and work towards, see that table, we can slowly see we work toward my target. I go from an operating income of 2.1 million to 5.3 million. I slowly work towards that with my rate increases. I'm saying let's spread this out for our ratepayers.
And I just want to make sure, because our financial statements use different language. I want to make sure apples are apples. So when you're talking operating income, you're talking what we call net income after transfers?
Nope. That's a great question. I'm talking about revenues, less expenses, which includes your transfer and includes your depreciation.
Right.
That revenue minus that expense total is operating income for rate setting purposes.
Okay.
Unrestricted reserves, I understood it to say.
Okay. So that includes a depreciation charge.
In that operating expenses, and it includes the transfer.
All right.
Okay. Does that answer your question?
Well, again, I'm just trying to compare it to our financial statements. All right.
I thought she said it was unrestricted. Unrestricted reserves. That's what she told me, that's what that column was.
If you looked at your financial statement, what you're going to see revenues, you're going to see expenses, which include your depreciation, then you're going to see other operating income and expenses like interest income,
Right.
interest expense, then you're going to see net income, then you're going to see, I think yours is set up that says net income or change in equity or something after transfer. I forget how it's set up exactly.
It's called net income after transfers, which
Okay,
includes
net
our
income
operating
after transfer.
Right.
I've simply taken that transfer and I've moved it up to before other operating income. The reason I do not use other operating income is because think about 10 years ago if we would have used interest income to offset rates, where we'd be today. I mean, we used to enjoy a much higher percent of a return.
Okay. Well, then, actually, that answers my question, because our other operating income numbers
Jump around.
jump around a little bit, but it's in the ballpark. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think one last slide, or a couple things we have to cover. Page 16, basically, this is the preliminary cost of service results for electric. What this shows right now, I'm just going to give you a quick example. For that resident, I'm looking at page 16, the first table. That residential customer charge currently is $7.80. That's what you're currently charging on a cost to serve basis. That rate should be $15.56. We would not move from $7.80 to $15.56 in one rate design. This table just gives me a guide to move towards when I design rates. Yes.
This is probably a question for Jason. Is this, will some of these cost of service numbers take the place of the exhaustive study that we recently accomplished on streetlights and all of the lighting in the city? Or is this just an average?
Do you want me to answer that? The street lighting is, the street lighting revenue in itself is included in the study. And what will happen if the commission decides to have a 1.5% rate increase, I'm going to ask for a bandwidth, it's called, in rate design. Your customers, some customers might see a I might ask for a 1.5% bandwidth. Some customers might see a 3% increase, some customers might see 0 increase. And the table I'm going to use to help guide me is on page 15, the bottom table. You will see your rate classes there. And I want to go back, and Jason, jump in, please, if I misstate this. Specifically, you asked about the lights and the street lighting. You've got a category called street lighting, which showed relatively close to cost of service. We take that 4.3% and we add or subtract 10% and say, you know, usage patterns change yearly. Anything that's way outside cost to serve, we consider it, you know, outside cost to serve. But it's close, the street lights are. Now that lights category, that's about the only category we didn't have what I would say super solid information on street light counts, and I believe, Jason, is it true that you're going to be looking at that soon?
We're going to be doing a survey. These are like outside lights that we sell.
Didn't we just do a really exhaustive study on those type of lights?
We lowered the rates. We did it last fall.
We recommended, but they were never implemented.
They
We
were
voted
never
for it.
They're not currently implemented.
I mean, we went as far as to detail every type of light that is out there anywhere in the city, I
Yeah,
thought.
Doug Hanley did the study, right?
Pardon me?
Doug Hanley did the study,
Hanley
right?
did
We
that.
talked about it. I thought we voted on
I
it.
did too.
Well,
Anyway, this is
we'll
gonna
get
take
back to
place?
that.
This
We'll
is,
talk
this
about
is
that
what we're
soon. Yeah.
including.
So this will
So-
take the place of that, okay.
So, but let me clarify, I did not do an exhaustive light study, okay? What I did is I looked at the revenues that class is bringing into the utility and what it should be bringing in. That is one area I'm not super confident right now on the light counts we have, okay? That particular line item. So regardless of what the study showed anyway, in my example with that bandwidth, let's just say the board or the commission says we're going to have a 1.5% increase next year in electric. That light area that shows the -30, I would probably not give them a rate increase. I would use that bandwidth of 1.5%, or I might ask for 2%, where no customer will see above a 3 with a 1.5 bandwidth and no customer will see below a 0. What that does is over time, when I use a bandwidth, it works me closer to cost to serve like this chart, but it doesn't cause rate shock. If I automatically gave lights a 30% decrease, think of the revenue I would have to recoup in it would cause rate shock for everybody along the way, okay? I'm trying to smooth out rate shock by smoothing in the rate percentages I'm recommending and asking for a bandwidth to move closer to cost to serve. I'm not going to just implement these rates. I'm going to slowly work you there over time and correcting any class that's out of cost to serve. Does that make sense? And we do that through the rate design, and we do it slowly over time so we don't cause rate shock.
So lights is just a drop into a meter and you have no maintenance from there on? You don't maintain the lights themselves?
Some street lights are metered, some are not. Outside lights are not metered at all. It's just a fixed charge.
But you have maintenance on those lights. I mean, there's costs to that over time. So, were there any other questions? So in summary, I guess, and then we can answer any questions you have, let's go to page 16, that bottom table. What I tried to do is just summarize everything that I'm talking about. As you saw from the tables, theoretically, there are some utilities that could have a rate increase next year, okay? What I tried to do is look at each utility's needs. I tried to stagger the rate increases to lower the impact on our customers. I tried to keep the rates as close to inflation as I could, because those are considered really reasonable rates across the country right now. And that is on second table on page 16. In summary, the telecommunications department looked healthy through the 5-year projection period, but remember in that 5th year, we were nearing our targets, so we can't let that go on forever. Gas, we had a 2% increase starting in 2017, not next year, 2017, then a 0, and then a 2%. Your PGA will change with purchase gas adjustment, purchase gas cost changes. Wastewater for 2016, I see that as your immediate need. If you remember that slide, you're currently under your cash critical balance in the wastewater department. I recommend a 3.5% increase for next year. 0 the next, 3.5 in 2018. You know, anything beyond the 2-year period, I'm just giving you guys an example of what you might need to do. Certainly you're gonna update this. But it's just showing you for what we know today.
Is that fiscal year ending? What's your
Yes,
Yeah, all these are fiscal years.
fiscal year ending, though?
well, you'd implement it at the beginning of the fiscal year. I mean, the
2016 is July 2016.
July 15.
July of 2015, you're gonna implement the rate. But the financial
July
projection you see,
2015.
Right.
the numbers are for fiscal year end. The water department, we would say 0 for next year, recommend 0 for next year, 3% every year, over the year after that. Electric, there's a couple things I need to do for you. I need to look at that PCA, delaying the recovery a little bit like we talked about, and staying on track like we talked about before. A 0% increase for next year, and consider a 1.5 for 2017. Now, what I would like from you today, if we want to turn to page 17, first slide, is basically my job today was to just tell you where you are financially with the utilities, where we need to move, tell you what our recommendations are, and then when we come back to give you real specific cost of service results. This today was hopefully to help you for budget preparation, you know, what you need to be looking for when you're preparing your budget, where your utilities are financially. So I'm looking for, if the commission does decide to go with basically it's the 3.5% in wastewater, what's gonna affect the 2016 budget year, okay? And if you approve that rate design, that rate percentage, you'll have to let me know so I can get the rate design prepared for you. And if you want me to come back, early next year, whenever it is, to present the rest of the information. And just in general, so you know, when we do approve, if we do approve any rate increases, we would try to put it on the customer charge where the cost of service study shows it needs to be, not driving you up to those rates, but working slowly to those rates over time. Now, are there any questions on anything we covered tonight? We covered 5 utilities, a lot of information. Yes.
I guess I just want to make sure I have an understanding, or we all have an understanding of chart on page 16.
Sure.
The findings, the 2 things that cause concern, and I understand that your purpose is to keep us from making bad decisions long-term for the utilities. But the things that do cause concern to me are, 1, am I correct that based on what you're recommending here, you're looking at between 5, other than next year, you're looking between a cumulative rate increase of 6.5%, 5 to 6.5% by the time you add all the percentages up?
And remember, if you want to add them up that way, sure.
And I realize they're not all the same dollar amount, but they're all increased.
Okay, and filtered into that, remember that your costs are increasing about 3% a year. And I'm going about every other year with inflation or something less.
Okay, and then my second question then is, or it's not a question, it's a, I want you to tell me if my statement is correct or not, so that we understand if it is. The 1.5% increase in the electric rates beginning in 2017 through 2019 do not actually reflect the actual cost of power, which will actually be have the biggest impact on our rates. Power cost adjustment.
It reflects what we believe your actual cost of power will be through a power cost projection. but we won't actually know until they actually happen. So the 1.5% increase covers what we need to get, a 1.5% increase in revenues overall from the utility, okay? I'm gonna design rates to get that, and then I'm gonna put the PCA where it needs to be, recouping your costs, hopefully, on like a 6-month rolling average. For the information we know today, that's what we need to do. If power supply costs change, that PCA will change.
But that is going to be, in all honesty, that's probably a rosy number, an optimistic view.
It's a forecast.
It's a forecast, yeah.
But the 1.5% is over and above the PCA changes.
Yes.
That's what I meant.
That's right.
Yeah.
Normally, when you set the rates, you attempt to capture the cost of power. We're in a dilemma here because of our under-recovery.
Correct.
So the rates are recovering the cost of power. We're maintaining a PCA, not to recover power costs, but to dig out of the deficit we built.
The accounts receivable.
But normally, the idea would be we do biennial rate adjustments. So every 2 years, you true up those costs so that you're capturing what you think the cost of power will be. And you only use PCAs to accommodate unforeseen but likely, just unpredictable changes in power.
Yeah, and Joe's absolutely correct. Your PCA right now is a little bit unique because you're recouping the costs, that are not in your base rate schedules. You're recouping the costs where power supply costs change, plus you're recouping a component to recover that under recovery from the past, okay? So that's a little unique right now for your PCA.
And one thing I'd point out, the recommended cash reserves in concept are to keep you whole while you adjust rates again. So if you were to encounter an unforeseen catastrophe, like you lost a large customer, they shut down and left town, or you had a hurricane come through, those cash reserves are to help you survive long enough to make necessary rate adjustments.
Absolutely, that's absolutely correct. That's why we call it a minimum. It's there for things like that. If I have a customer leave town, or I had a huge piece of equipment default or whatever, and I needed, to spend a lot of money on it, I can fall back on that reserve, get the system up and running without a major blip to customers, but then I can look at my rates and say, now what do I need to do to recover that money and smooth that rate out over time? It's kind of like a safety net. It gives you time to figure out a plan to then recover that cost.
It would appear to me that these rate increases you're recommended, it's really based upon your projected financial balance, et cetera, and cash reserve. So it boils down, how comfortable does our financial people feel with these numbers? Is it what we want to go with? I mean, how can we sit up here and say, yeah, these are the numbers and we want to go with these? I mean, the key is, how comfortable is our financial people with these numbers that we're shooting for?
If anybody wants to speak, I can let them speak from that point of view, but just to reiterate from our point of view, we actually do a financial projection independent of what we think, independent of your budget, okay? This is what we, based on our education, think is gonna happen. We make that forecast, okay? There it is. And then I take the budget you guys have prepared, for example, for 2015. I made a projection for 2015. I take your 2015 budget, I lay it right next to mine, and I say, are they comparable? If the answer is yes, I know we're on the same page. I mean, I think your budget's in line, and I think my projection's in line. If either of those components are off, whether it be revenues or expenses, that's when I go back to your staff, which we've been doing all along, and that's where I go back and say, something doesn't look right here. Your budget line item says this. My projection says it should be this. Where am I off? Did you add an operation? Did you add people? Did you cut an expense somewhere? And we work that together, and then that's what the study is based off projecting forward. So we know for projections, it's as close as it can be, because I've done my own independent study without letting your budget influence me, and you've prepared your budget, obviously before my numbers. So from my point of view, that's how we do it. I don't know if staff wants to speak to that or not, or whatever, but. So we make sure, I want good numbers going in, and I make sure I'm close to your budget.
Let me go back and ask a question about capital improvements on page 10. The wastewater financial projection, no rate changes. I want to make sure I heard you say this the way I heard it. Those capital improvements numbers that are in there for that 5 years, they are numbers that you gleaned from the 5-year capital plan.
Okay, most of the time, I wanna, that's a great question. In the wastewater department, and it happens to be close, I use your 5-year capital plan you gave me unless I think it's represented too low in a certain year.
Okay, all right, fine. That's great answer. Now, so the amount of those capital improvements weighed upon your increase your amount of your projected your required cash balance.
Yes, that capital.
The more capital improvements you got in the pipeline, the more cash balance you need down the road.
Well, the more
Is that
cash,
In my minimum, okay, we're talking about two different things. Let me answer that two ways. One,
Okay.
the capital plan is reflected in the column right to the left of it, the projected cash balances,
Right.
okay, the balances.
Yes.
Now, my minimum recommendation, for example, it is $5 million in 2016. What I've done is I've taken that 5-year capital stream, and I've taken 20% of that, and I've reserved that as part of that minimum. And the reason I take 20% is that's 1/5 of a 5-year plan. I want the construction funds available at the beginning of the year.
Road.
Okay, so that 5-year capital plan, the risk of that is rolled into that $5 million minimum recommendation. But now, the actual yearly expenditures that are projected in that 5-year capital column are reflected in the column right to the left of that projected cash balances. Does that make sense?
So is it $1 to $5 or $5 to 1? If we eliminated all of those capital improvements, how much would it change your recommended target for the cash balance?
If you add up, if somebody can add up 1.6, 1.6, 2.2, 1.7, and 2.4, and take
Yes.
20% of that,
20%.
that's how much is rolled into that 5 million. If you
Okay,
add those
I got
numbers
it.
up, so what is
So
that?
it's 1/5 of total equals,
Let's pretend that's $2 million a year for easy, so let's say $10 million over that 5-year period. $2 million of the 5 is due to that capital plan.
okay.
Because that's about what you're spending a year, actually, in that department. If you
Yeah.
actually look,
You know, I really appreciate your technique here, the way you're going about this. And I think Mr. Donahue sort of brought up some of that earlier about some of the increases we've had in the past. We've got some overcapacity. There are some projects that are in these 5-year plans that may or may not make any sense as we go forward. And that's why I was trying to figure out exactly how much this was really weighing on some of these decisions you're making or influencing them as we were trying to do this. Because these are kind of budgeting tools that we can learn from listening to you try to get us to speak the language of the cost of service. Then we can educate ourselves about what kind of what can we do to influence those numbers if we want.
okay, and that's a great point and a great
And
question.
that's what we're here for.
One thing I want you to remember, though, and that's a great
Okay,
question.
okay.
Let's just pretend I removed all that capital, okay?
Yeah.
So my cash flow is gonna go up substantially, correct? So the first thing you might say, if I didn't spend any capital money, my
Right.
cash balance is gonna go up, because I'm not spending any money.
Yeah.
The first thing you're gonna say is, well, then I wouldn't have to have a rate increase, would I? But The target I want you to look at too is the operating income target. When I remove that capital, the only thing that's going to save on that adjusted operating income line is the very small amount of depreciation I add every year to that operating income. So that target's going to be way off. I'm not going to still be funding that target, so I'm going to look at that target and I'm going to say, well, you're still underfunding operating income. Your cash is building, but the reason your cash is building is because you're not spending capital, and I'm going to tell you that's a red flag.
But at the same time, if I go out and spend that money and I've got debt service on that money and it doesn't create, that expenditure doesn't create enough revenue to cover the debt service, then that probably didn't work to my advantage either, did it?
The way we look at it is not the debt service, it's the depreciation buried in that operating income expense.
I'm going to stick by what I said, because if I go spend money on a piece of capital equipment or some project and it does not create enough revenue, then if I'm in a new situation, I'm not talking about safety issues or having to replace something. If you're talking about something new and I can't create enough revenue to pay the debt service on it, I might ought to think twice about doing that. That's what I'm saying to you. And I know that kind of sounds like, back of your envelope, but sometimes you get yourself in a situation where you really don't want to do every capital project. And that's the only reason why I was asking you that. I'm taking up too much time.
No, because that's another great question. You fell into the third target. That's another great question. Look at the last column.
Debt coverage ratio.
Your debt coverage ratio. If you couldn't afford your debt, that coverage ratio would be under a 1. It would be a 0.9 or under, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
0.99 or under. All of your funds, actually, all your funds you're not highly leveraged in any fund. The highest leveraged fund you have is the electric department at 27%. That's relatively low in the scheme of debt. Water is about 14%, wastewater is about 11%, gas is about 5%, and you don't have any debt in telecommunications. So that is another target I look at, and that's one of the least targets I'm concerned about in your utilities. I'm concerned about it, but because of your results and looking at that target is healthy.
Are you concerned because we haven't borrowed enough money?
No, I'm not concerned that you haven't borrowed enough money. I'm telling you that there are utilities out there that are highly leveraged, highly aged, and that's not here. You're about an average age
And
of
I
depreciation.
because that's a double whammy, highly leveraged and highly aged.
Right, and I look at that. You're only aged, each of your utilities are at least 50, net book remaining value, 50% or higher, which means, your depreciation is, you're not over 50% depreciated.
Right.
You're not highly aged,
Okay.
okay? Then the next thing I look at is say, well, how much debt do you have outstanding to all that net book value? And your highest leveraged fund is 27% at electric. That's a good position to be in.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So just one other question. When you looked at your capital improvements and you looked at your projected cash balances, what did you make in terms of an assumption of sources of cash for the capital improvements?
All the capital improvements were internally funded. I didn't have any bond. If you actually look at each table, there's a bond issuance column right next to the debt coverage ratio. I do not believe there were any bonds. There were no bonds projected in any of the funds. I need to double check electric, although I doubt, because that table's set up a little bit differently. And certainly not to telecommunications.
Just help me out a little bit. If I've got a gas fund that's making $862,000 adjusted operating income, and we're spending capital improvements of 1.5 and 3.2 million, and my projected cash balance goes down $1 million when I've spent $4.7 million on capital, how's that happen?
Depreciation. Built in that expense number is a non-cash expense item.
Okay.
Depreciation. So you got to add that non-cash expense back for a cash flow basis. I set rates based on depreciation, but now my cash flow.
So I add back about 2.75 million in depreciation,
Yeah.
and that's why we have roughly $1 million drop.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it.
Yeah, good question.
Anybody else? Thank you, Ms. Lund.
I appreciate your time. If you guys have any questions, because I gave you a lot of information tonight, you've got the preliminary, just picture of where you are today. If you have any questions, let me know. Let me know if you want me to come back and.
Did you get the guidance you needed?
That's what I was going to ask.
I don't think so.
Oh, excuse me, yes, wastewater. Are they taking action tonight, or?
No.
No.
But you need guidance.
Okay, do we think, basically, do you want me to, of the rate recommendations I made, whether it be tonight or soon, if you have me come back, I need guidance on the rates that I've recommended. Meaning, does the commission want to approve a 3.5% rate adjustment for wastewater next year? And if this is in fact a 2-year rate study,
Since that's the most pending.
Yeah, I think you want to ask the question just a little bit differently. Does the commission want to recommend that you consider the application of the 3.5%?
does the commission want to consider a 3.5% rate adjustment for 2016? And if this is a 2-year rate study, does the commission want to consider a 2% in gas for 2017, a 3% in water for 2017, and a 1.5% in electric for 2017? In addition, I believe I need to get the commission more information on either moving the PCA to .002 or moving it to .004 in December, or delaying that till June of 2017.
And we can make the motion at the next meeting. We don't have to take action, but she needs guidance to move forward, at least for wastewater.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you might even need guidance for your budgets as well, in order to move forward with that, to project the revenues in those areas.
Just for fiscal year 16.
Just for 2016.
All right, we're going to discuss the guidance.
At the next meeting.
I don't know, I'm not in a position myself to opine on these subjects tonight. Does anybody else want to discuss this tonight, or do we want to come back? Mr. King?
I know officials like the commission and certainly the council are always concerned about incremental approvals because they feel like they get too far out and can't turn back. But what I understand you're asking is not anything like a recommendation yet. It's based on what we've heard. Would we like you to proceed on the assumptions you've laid out here? And if we're unhappy with that product, we'll tell you so, and you'll make adjustments. So what at the appropriate time becomes a set of recommendations to council are not bound by any decisions now. It's just you need direction on
Absolutely.
where to proceed.
Because-
And thank you, Mr. King, and I appreciate you talking about those incremental decisions, because sometimes you feel like you have voted for
Right.
something you might not want to vote for later. Let me suggest to you this. There is only one of these rates which would impact the budget year ending on June 30th, 2016.
Wastewater.
That's the wastewater.
Right.
Would you all like to, let the commission at this time vote to indicate some guidance on that one, and the others we'll come back and talk about later, if that will help you.
Yeah, but the only risk is, the reason I ask for guidance is, I design one set of rates for each of the utilities, theoretically, if there's a rate change. If I go back and I design a 3.5% rate increase, and you guys know today that that's not, that's automatically out for wastewater, I won't design that increase, because if you come back and say, well, we really only want a 1.5, then I have to redesign that rate.
Okay.
And that's not included in the
Well,
study.
we're getting ready to vote on that,
But
because I
Phil,
think what
Phil,
I was asked to do here, I
have-
think, was to do guidance, and we're going to do some guidance right now.
I think, if you look at the fact that we have a projected cash balance at the end of 2015 of $2.3 million in our wastewater plant. I think, I'm concerned.
Sure. Can we have a motion to do guidance, and then can we discuss it?
Just, it looks to me like you need 2017 too, because you're preparing the rate increase for 2 years that you're gonna bring back to us.
But I believe your immediate needs are your budget for 2016, which it's going to help your budget process, I believe, to know what you're doing for 2016, and it'll help me to come back and design the rate. It's totally true, your immediate need isn't the 2017 year. But if this is a 2-year, if you're considering this a 2-year rate study, I would need that year too, so I can design those rates for you.
Right.
That's what I thought.
Can somebody make a motion to guide this way?
I would move that we provide guidance to take the next step, following what's recommended for 2016 and 17. Understanding that if the commission sees results that it cannot recommend to council, it's going to direct the consultant to make adjustments. But I simply don't see, so that's my motion, that we direct the consultant to proceed on the recommended biennial rate adjustments presented.
For 2016 and 17?
Right.
Which would include 2% for gas, 3.5% for wastewater, 3% for water, and 1.5% for electricity.
In various years.
In the designated years.
Yeah, right. But
And
it would include, that's four increase over 2 year period.
And I would also add that the electric analysis would include maintaining our current plan of increasing the PCA to .004 in December.
Probably need a second, and then that sounds like an amendment to the motion, unless Mr. King decides that's part of his motion.
I would accept that as part of the motion.
Now you need a second on that motion.
Yes, right. Do I hear a second to the motion?
I'll second it.
Excuse me? You
I'll second
seconded it? Okay. I thought you amended. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. You have your guidance, Ms. Lund.
Okay, thank you. I will
You're welcome.
prepare that, and I will get with staff to see when and if they need us to come back.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Next up, the next item on the agenda is our communications section. First of all, from the city manager, do you have anything today?
No.
Thank you. Utility staff, is there anyone that has anything? If you'll step forward to the mic. Thank you. I know the hour's late and it's been a long meeting. Appreciate your forbearance. Commission members, Mr. Donahue.
I have nothing at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Turpin?
No.
Mr. Joss?
No.
Mr. Shanks?
No.
I don't have anything either. Public comments? Anyone from the public like to speak? And director's report? Mr. Gray?
No, sir.
Nothing. I appreciate you all coming and being with us tonight. It was a great meeting. Thank
You
you.
got to decide
Ms.
about
Lund. We
December
really appreciate it.
meeting.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
You got to decide about the December meeting. There was some discussion maybe.
Oh, well, I think you all took care of my whole questioning about the December meeting. The guidance has been, the train has moved on, so I don't think we need to have a December meeting. Do you have anything particular, Jason, that you want to do?
What I had planned was capital improvement projects, updates for power and light telecommunications, but we can do that another month.
If you all want to not have that meeting, it will be fine, and we can say that by consensus. Does anyone want to have that meeting? Good. We're gonna give ourselves a little Christmas present, and we're not gonna have a December meeting. Thank you all for coming and being with us. This meeting is adjourned.